Welcome back to our World Cup edition of Sports Seriously. Okay, Brian and Emily, we broke down the American side, but there's plenty of broader storylines to highlight surrounding this World Cup. Let's look at the rest of the field. Emily, which team looks the strongest heading in?
Yeah, I'm going to say it's Brazil. And I'm going to say it because they made a statement putting 9 forwards on their team. 9 goal scorers, 9 guys that can come at you. And that includes Vinicius Jr., who is an absolute superstar. It includes Neymar. I mean, the list goes on and on. Rodrigo. There's a bunch of players that can contribute to this Brazilian forward attack. And then you're like, okay, so they're just going to outscore you and let a bunch of goals in. But that's not true either, because they've got the top 2 Premier League goalkeepers with Ederson and Allison in the back. But I think that for me, I just like the boldness that Brazil comes out with those 9 forwards.
I hear you sighing.
I would just like to remind you that Lionel Messi and Argentina, there's a clash that is set up between Brazil and Argentina should they both win their group, where they will meet in the quarterfinals. So you can have your Brazil, and that's cool. I'm not knocking it, but Argentina, especially coming off that Copa America win.
So, Brian, speaking of Messi, 2 names that we are absolutely going to hear is Cristiano Ronaldo and Leo Messi. Both of these guys have been huge global stars for the sport. Will what happened in Qatar add or take away from either's legacy?
Well, I would say that right now it feels as though Cristiano Ronaldo is more on the downslope than Lionel Messi is. Now, you watch 2 players that not too long ago were playing for Barcelona and Juve, respectively, both for one reason or another either decided to or were forced to move from their club. And what Cristiano Ronaldo has done at Manchester United, you can't take away the goals. What Lionel Messi is doing at PSG, you can't take away his run of form. But with regards to international play, my hope is that Lionel Messi can replicate the success he had at Copa America, because I think there's been so much undue conversation and pressure about his performance with the national team when it was more about the lack of the collective as opposed to the individual.
So some big implications at Qatar. Now we have to talk about the guys who won't be there. As we know, the timing of this World Cup is a bit strange, more on that in a moment, but we're seeing a rash of top names dealing with injuries, seeing as the tournament is butted right up against league play. So Brian, who's been bitten the worst by untimely absences?
If I start in the CONCACAF region, I'll talk about Canada. Maxime Crepeau taking a red card and breaking his leg in the MLS Cup final, and then we don't know the extent of Alphonso Davies, one of the world's best left backs, after picking up a bit of a knock at Bayern Munich. So that's regionally. I would say internationally, it's got to be Didier Deschamps in France. What has happened to N'Golo Kanté, who's missed the majority of this season for domestic football. Same with Paul Pogba at Juve. I think when you're talking about what I said with Tyler Adams, the Chihuahua, the ankle biter, the guy that just runs and shuts down everything, that is N'Golo Kanté and has been N'Golo Kanté for the past 6, 7, 8 years. Paul Pogba, whether you like him or you hate him, you can't argue his talent. He's one of the most recognizable footballers on the field and off the field. And Didier Deschamps in France, not having those 2 players, it's going to put a hell of a lot of pressure on some young, less experienced players in that central midfield position.
And if I could just add to that, because there are so many teams that are part of this World Cup, and because of the timing, there's so many injuries. One player that is a huge difference maker for his country, Senegal, is Sadio Mane, and he's injured. And there's been talk around it, and people saying basically he's their Messi. And there are reports that he will go with the team to the World Cup, maybe just for morale. The injury that he has, it's questionable whether he's going to be on the field, and that changes the dynamic of the team and how they're going to be able to compete. It goes from a competitor to a question mark.
So that begs the question, why is the World Cup taking place during the holiday season? Short answer, a lot of people are saying FIFA's corrupt. Shocker. But that's not the only issue facing this event. Our very own Nancy Armour, who will be in Qatar, breaks down the dark cloud hanging over this year's World Cup.
Since Qatar was selected to host the 2022 World Cup 12 years ago, there's been one issue after another. Initially, it was concerns about bribery that Qatar basically bought the World Cup. But then once Qatar got the bid, then people really started digging in on the country itself. There were questions about the heat. So the tournament was moved from its traditional June-July window to November because there's no way you could do it in the heat. But what was done in the heat was building stadiums. And so there has been a lot of concerns raised about the treatment of migrant workers. It was called the kafala system in Qatar, which was basically a 21st century form of slavery. And they were working in extreme heat. They were living in awful conditions. They were not allowed to go home. They were paid pennies, and many died. It's not clear how many. The Qatari government says 3, and we all know that's not accurate. So there's that. Qatar has an awful record in terms of treatment of women and the LGBTQ plus community in particular. There has been some progress, but does it fix all of Qatar's problems? Absolutely not.
So Brian, take us inside the locker room. How would you personally be handling having to deal with so much issues on and off the pitch?
Well, first, I think we have to recognize that you have guys that want to use their platform to put whatever their feeling is forward, whether it's political good or putting forward some type of injustice that they're recognizing. And then there's that just want to play the game. I think what we've seen with Greg Berhalter and this group of U.S. men's national team players is they are not afraid of using their platform in a positive manner. Greg Berhalter, in particular, the head coach of the U.S. men's national team, actually started the whole gun control conversation for the group and pushing that narrative where everyone got behind it. A little bit different, right? We're not talking about things that happen in the United States. We're happening about what's been going on in Qatar. So my expectation is that the group comes together, they decide and agree on something, whether that be a physical statement, a verbal statement, or a show of strength and unity amongst the group. Right before kickoff, arm in arm, wearing some type of jacket, whatever that looks like, I think this U.S. men's national team will collectively put a very strong public statement out.
Brian, you said it, the world will be watching. And so we asked Nancy straight up, should the World Cup even be happening?
In a perfect world, no. There are any number of problems, whether you're talking about the human rights abuses, the deaths of the migrant workers and the exploitation of them. If it leads to change, we've already seen the kafala system has been quote unquote abandoned. There are differing opinions on to the extent of that. But if these are lasting changes, if these are lasting improvements, and it makes for a better country, I don't know that I want to say that it's worth it. But something good has to come out of it because they're not going to call it off. And I think if you would ask FIFA, if you would take the people who voted in 2010, ask them to do their vote again, would they vote for Qatar again? I don't know.
So, Emily, same question to you. Should the World Cup even be taking place?
Look, I'm not going to disagree with Nancy on anything. She is well versed in all of this, but also on the surface, you can't look at a World Cup that was earned on bribery and say that it should happen. And that's just the surface level. That's just how they got it. Then you look at the issues as a country in a whole. And I think this is the world's game, and there absolutely should be a World Cup in the Middle East. It needs to be in every region of the world because everyone deserves a chance to be able to host an event like this. But you have to look at the country and what they stand for, and you have to be careful of what they are using the World Cup for.
I will say, though, it feels like this World Cup, for the first time that I can ever remember, it's almost as if everybody wants it just to get done so we can move on. You don't feel like the advertising push and campaign that's usually there with the World Cup is hyping around Qatar. So as soon as this is done, we understand the transition then is to the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and the push to 2026. And I think at a bare minimum, as you said, if the light can shine bright enough that Qatar can do their best from now on, I think that's a positive step in the right direction. But I think it's naive not to suggest that anyone involved in the official ramifications of allowing Qatar to have the World Cup, a majority of those people have already been indicted, have passed away, or are awaiting extradition for the New York General Attorney's Office.
Who knew such a fun game could be so complicated? Well, there's still a lot more to unpack on this show, but up next, Emily had the chance to sit down with the legend of the game, Wayne Rooney.
Hey sports fans, if you want to see more conversations with athletes and stars, check out these videos right here and be sure to subscribe for more from USA Today Sports.